Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. All right, welcome to another episode of Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today, I am joined by John Fish, the Chairman and CEO of Suffolk Construction, and Jim Lynch, the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Autodesk Construction Solutions. Today, we're going to be talking about some fun and exciting topics like the state of the construction industry today, the future of construction, and how a lot of the choices that our teams and companies and larger organizations are making right now are going to have a big impact on the future in the state of our industry in 10, 15, 20 years from now. And so without further ado, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. I very much appreciate it. And Jim, I think this is your fourth time on the show. So thank you for being the reigning champ at this point.
Well, Eric, thank you for having me again, and so happy that we're doing this here in our Boston Technology Center. So, but more importantly, I am so excited to have John Fish, President and Chairman of Suffolk Construction, joining us today. John and I have built a relationship over the last couple of years, and he is going to share some amazing insights with our audience. So this is gonna be a good one.
Yeah, we're going to have a fun conversation. And John, again, just thank you so much for being here today. It's a real honor to have the opportunity to hear some of your perspective about the state of construction right now.
Well, Eric, I'd like to begin by thanking you and your organization for putting this podcast together, because as you know, the more we can socialize issues of innovation and technology in our industry, it makes a huge difference, because again, it brings people together in a very, very thoughtful way. And then Jim, I want to thank you and your organization. It's wonderful to partner with organizations like yourself that really are trying to be transformative in a category that we've had challenge with over the last few years. But there's no doubt in my mind that they say not all points in time are equal. This is a point in time that we are going to make a huge difference over the next 4 or 5 years to transform this industry. And I look forward to partnering with you on that opportunity.
That's great, John. I agree. I think the next 4 or 5 years are going to be, super innovative and exciting and breakthrough for the industry.
Yeah.
And I think without having these types of conversations, it's going to slow that growth that we all really need to. So it's always a privilege. And, I'm thankful that Autodesk has given us a platform like this to have these conversations. But Jim, since you are the reigning champ on Autodesk as far as appearances, I'm going to put you on the spot first, since, you know the routine. So to start us off today, can you briefly describe your thoughts on the current state of the construction industry, considering the global environment and everything we've seen over the last few years?
Yeah, sure, Eric. Let me, as you know, I spend a great deal of time traveling around the globe, meeting with our customers and really understanding their business challenges and how they see technology playing a role in helping them to build better, to be more productive, to be more safe, or to be safer, and to be more sustainable. In fact, I just came back I was in Europe last week. And the themes that continue to come up with the customers as I speak to them are, labor shortages, the labor challenges. Everybody is talking about the labor challenges. In fact, many of the customers I talk about the fact that they have strong backlogs, but in fact, they're actually turning down work because of the lack of skilled workers. The other thing, of course, supply chains is a significant challenge for our global customers. So when I think of challenges, those are the two that come up repeatedly from our customers. I will say they are all deeply invested and excited about the role that technology is playing, and in fact can play to drive their businesses forward.
Jim, I want to thank you for that comment. I would agree with you. I think right now, as I travel the country, I was in Texas yesterday, I was in Washington on Monday. I'm hearing that most contractors in the industry have a strong backlog. And that doesn't surprise me, because I think coming out of COVID, the federal government pumped in $6.5 trillion worth of money, especially in infrastructure, and that has really fueled, I think, the construction climate coupled with the private sector. But I think to your point, I think labor scarcity of labor has driven up construction labor costs substantially over the last 2.5 to 3 years, like I've never seen before in my life. And I don't think it's going to subside because we have an intrinsic labor shortage in our industry. In fact, in 2023 of February, there was statistics out there that we had over 500 job openings in construction. And we don't have skilled labor to fill those particular openings. So to me, it's a systemic issue, coupled with the fact that the federal government in Washington, where I was on Monday to talk about immigration, has not really come together to put forth a solid immigration bill to not only help solve the problems in our industry, but equally importantly, as we talk about re-engineering or rebuilding this country, I don't see how we're going to do it if we don't come up with this proper immigration policy to allow people that want to work, come to work, and provide productivity to our category.
And it's such a multi-layered challenge that we're all facing right now. And I appreciate your perspective. And the turning down work challenge is a big one for contractors. I think a lot of people don't consider in the big picture. It doesn't feel good to tell an owner that you have a great relationship with that you aren't going to bid on a project that they put out to bid simply because you don't have the resources to do it successfully. And if you do bid on that project and you're under-resourced, you're putting yourself at risk too, because you might not be able to deliver within the scope of what their expectations are, which could potentially tarnish relationships. So it's a dance that's really challenging to have. And I really like the perspective on finding opportunities to bring people in to fill these roles. And it's a bigger conversation on educating people on what those opportunities really are. But if we don't give them the avenue to, get people in those roles and in those seats and start learning about what that opportunity really is, I think we're behind the curve, unfortunately, right now, and there's a lot of work left to do, which leads into my next question, actually, which I'd like to give to you, John. And so think about an ideal world where all of the common blockers to change are magically removed. So we're in this fortunate space now where we've identified all these challenges and we've managed to mitigate most of them. And we're empowered to really rapidly improve how we build over the next decade. So with that in mind, can you tell me about your ideal vision for what construction would look like in 10 years from now?
Yeah, Eric, again, thank you for that question. I will. I think I've got to go back before I go forward. I take a look back in the 1930s when they built the Empire State Building. I don't think people realize that building was built in 13 months. And today, if somebody asked to schedule that building out, it would probably take at least 4, if not 5 to 6 years to build it today. And that has to prod a question of why. And yes, I understand regulation. Yes, I understand safety rules and various other types of things. But fundamentally, our business has become functionally dysfunctional at the end of the day. Siloed, disconnected. And I think that has gone because risk mitigation entered into the industry really in a significant way in the 40s and 50s, and we introduced CM, not at risk. And all of a sudden, I think you introduced silos, where the architect worked directly for the client worked for the contractor, and the contractor worked for the architect, and all of a sudden, you started seeing those relationships become more and more distant, as opposed to less aligned. And so to me, we have to move forward in today's day and age of realigning the built world. And to me, what that means is how do we carry alignment of interest between the architect, the developer, and the contractor? And to me, I think that's the ultimate challenge we're dealing with right now. And so our vision going forward is, to answer your question specifically, is we call it Vision 2025. How do we integrate the built world into a seamless platform? How do we deliver architectural services in partnership with the architectural community? Let the architect community do the cartoons and create the vocabulary and the program for the building. But can we take the responsibility of doing construction documents and complete those drawings? Can we take on maybe even getting involved in the capital stack? We have what is called Suffolk Capital. Can we invest in the GP stack of the capital stack to have alignment of interest with the developer? So again, everybody's looking out for each other's back. And the other idea is self-perform. I really believe in this market going forward, the self-perform, what has gotten away from most GCs, is coming back into the market. How do we minimize the intermediaries to lower the cost of doing business and having much more control over that process as a whole? And lastly, property management. Okay, how do we provide skill sets? Okay, and also instructional capabilities for the people that are building the building that know best to the owners that are transferring over. But the last comment I would make as part of that built platform is this. So what's the tool or toolbox that's going to allow us to accomplish that? And that is single-handedly 2 things. 1, technology and data. And the tools in our box today First, where they're going to be in 2 years from now are going to change quite rapidly. Secondly, if you can't measure it, you're not going to be able to manage it. And to me, data is the gold of construction going forward. And I say this very humbly to you. We invested probably 6 or 7 years ago to the creation of a clean data lake. We have 29 data analysts in our organization. And what they do, they crunch data each and every day. Now, we've been very retrospective in the use of our data. But what I would say on a going forward basis, we're being much more prospective, which is important to us. And what we have to get over is data is a weapon. And if it's used in the incorrect manner, it can cause problems in our industry overall. We see it in a no-fault culture environment that data can be absolutely, in many ways, a panacea to the future in construction.
I'm so excited about where we're at with the data conversation. And I'm encouraged by what you've shared here. I don't know if I've spoken to anybody who has that many on staff focused exclusively on data. And it's a huge forward-looking consideration, because what we see most typically with regards to construction data is exactly what you said, as far as it's a retrospective. We've captured these things. Let's step back and think about how we can analyze it to put it into a dashboard that might be useful for our company. But I think the organizations that are really looking at what do we want to understand, because those questions should and absolutely have to inform our dashboard choices in the data capturing and the processes, because if they're not, then it's always going to be that retrospective and you're not getting your just-in-time decision making. It's always something that's in aggregate. And so I'm encouraged by it. And Jim, I've heard you talk about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, Suffolk is absolutely a leader. And as I look at our customers around the globe, the size of his team that is really focused on data and data analytics, it's super impressive. And, it's to me, I think of it as the idea of, the data that is there. How do you turn that data into information? And I think Suffolk is doing a great job with that. What we need to do as technologists is make sure that we're providing the tools that help you, pull those deep insights, those key learnings to help you predict issues on future projects before you're out on the job site. It starts with data. It really starts with data. And that's what John and his team are doing, building that database, if you will. And what we're trying to do is come up, alongside as a partner and say, okay, we've got some machine learning capabilities, some AI capabilities that can put that data to work and to help you drive better outcomes.
And I think we're in a very fortunate moment in time right now where we can be having these conversations in doing so with intent. And I want to be fair, it's an overwhelming problem if your data standards and your data housekeeping haven't been up to par, especially if you're a large organization. Making large changes quickly brings and introduces risk into a business. But I always advise people when we talk about these data conversations is pick one area and start making those improvements there. Prove to your team that there's a purpose for this and why. And then you get to start iterating, and maybe 6, 10, 12, 14 months down the line, now you get to start applying that in a more broad way. And then suddenly you're able to think across your business instead of from project to project. And so it kind of changes the conversation. But I agree. It's that crux right now where we put the key in the lock and turn it, and away we go.
Eric, maybe just a comment, if you don't mind, is that, it's interesting how you point that out, 16 months. Well, when we started this journey out, and I call it the data journey, we started this probably about 7 or 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's been a very substantial investment. And as a privately held company, knowing that R&D is not a big thing in the construction category because margins are compressed overall. But I've been greatly fortunate, and I say that very humbly, that I can invest those dollars into a strategy that I think can transform the way we build our buildings going forward. And so I'm excited about it. But the second point I would like to make is that it's a cultural shift too. And if data is presented, especially to field operations, in a way that seems like it's Big Brother watching you, okay, and holding you accountable, it's the exact antithesis of what you really want. You have to go out there and explain to people how this is making their life easier, more productive, and really at the end of the day, how they can spend more time at home with their family.
Yeah, the communication there, I think, is the key too, because nobody likes to have somebody come in and go, this is how you're doing this now, especially with tradespeople who have been doing something for 30 years the same way. And everything does need to change over time, and we can introduce that. But it's the methods that you take to introduce that change that I think are indicative of success or maybe slow failure in the long run. It's a big challenge. But John, you actually lead into my next question very nicely. So what has changed the most from your perspective in construction in the last 5 to 10 years?
I think the introduction of technology, obviously, VDC, artificial intelligence in some respects. And I think really what we're seeing really the early days of how our industry can actually be transformed without being intimidating. And to me, our category, is one of the last categories of all categories to be innovative. We're down with hunting and fishing, I think, in agriculture, which is a little bit of embarrassment. But I think the day has come where we're realizing that the cost is greater than the value created. It's a very, very important concept. And we haven't hit that for a long period, now that we have coming out of post-COVID and all the escalation that we've realized. So if we don't leverage technology, we don't have that cultural change or that cultural shift, if we don't explain to our category as a whole that we need to reinvent ourselves, I feel somebody else is going to do it. And that will be technology companies at the end of the day. So to me, this is an opportunity. We're having these type of podcasts and people not looking like they're competing with each other, but more importantly, Eric, collaborating with each other. Because there's no single bullet that's going to solve this issue in our industry. It's got to be a collaborative effort. We've got to come together as a team, and people have to go in what I call in my company a no-fault culture. Don't be afraid to make a mistake, because we will make many, but what will happen at the end of the day, we'll come out at the other end stronger, more aligned, and more collaborative.
I mean, there's so much to comment on there. That is, it's first of all, this idea that learn from it's okay to fail. If you learn something from failing, that's a good thing. I used to have a boss that used to say, "Fail fast forward." Fail fast, but then move forward. Learn from it, and put those mistakes to use. It's really interesting. If I look at construction over the last 5 years, by the way. 5 years ago, I used to always quote the McKinsey study that talked about construction only being better than hunting and fishing. I don't talk about that anymore because I don't think it's true anymore. Listen, we're still in our infancy. We still have a long way to go as an industry to adopt technology, but the hunger is there. As you know, Eric, I was part of Autodesk when we acquired Revit, when we rolled out the concept of BIM, when we drove the concept of BIM across the industry. And I can tell you the speed at which our construction customers today are interested and embracing technology is much faster than we saw from the design community back in the early 2000s. That moved slow. It took us a while to get the concept of building information modeling to really take off. Look at construction today and look at just look at our usage, the usage of our tools by our customers. I mean, exponential growth. Honestly, it's really impressive to see. And that is because the understanding that there is a great opportunity to be had by embracing these tools. So it's great to see, but I loved what John said about coming together and working together. And I'm going to tie it back to the data conversation because I've spoken to some in the industry that, when we talk about our machine learning capabilities, they're like, hey, I don't want you training your algorithms with my information, my data. And even if you explain that, listen, it's anonymized. Nobody knows that, we're learning about, water leakage issues by your data, but we're anonymizing it so that you can benefit from it and others can as well. And there's a lot of companies that will stand back and stand off on that. But I think there's a huge opportunity for the industry to come together. And when it does, and I'm optimistic and confident that it will really leapfrog from where we are today.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I think we're also benefiting from a moment where the technology is so much easier to use than it was historically. I mean, when I stepped into construction a little over a decade ago, there really wasn't anything purpose built. And so with that changing and perspective changing, I think people are a lot more accepting of, okay, there's change, but there's a reason for it. And we're getting better at qualifying it, because if you don't qualify it well that first time, it's very hard to change that perspective the second time when you bring something new in and they go, oh, I got burned by that dashboard because it wasn't accurate, or I got burned by that tool because it didn't work the way it was supposed to. And 10 years later, they're still hesitant. And as we build those relationships and build the trust internally, I think that's when we start to change minds, and you find your champions and you build on those successes. But Jim, your thoughts here actually kind of lead into the next question for me. And so I'm curious, what do you think over the last 5 to 10 years has not changed but probably should have?
What has not changed? Well, John talked about project structures, right? This design, bid, build, the relationships. Honestly, I remember when we built out our office that was in Waltham, Massachusetts, a little bit of ways up the road here. It was an IPD project, integrated project delivery, and when I was a part of that, when I witnessed that, I was like, this is it. This is where the industry is going. This is when those walls between developers, designers, contractors, this is when those walls come tumbling down. And here we are, 15 years later, and the walls are not broken down. I really expected to see an explosion in IPD, and it hasn't happened. So that to me is the biggest thing that hasn't happened. I could go on the technology path, but that to me is the biggest thing that hasn't happened.
I'm cautiously optimistic about that conversation though, because I am hearing more positive reception to it. And I understand some of the hesitation at times, because it feels weird when you have been working in the same contract types for so many years to suddenly say, okay, subcontractors and other organizations that I've been in JVs or worked directly with, I'm going to lift the curtain now and you get to see all the things. That feels a little strange. But as you get to message that and communicate it, and you show that there is an ROI, there's incentive here to step back and say, you're going to benefit from this, I'm going to benefit from this, and our owners are going to benefit from this. I think you get to move forward there. But you also have to have an owner that goes, okay, that seems like a good idea as well. And if not everybody is interested in stepping up to the table, there's going to be some hesitancy, to put it politely.
Yeah.
So, John, I'm also curious, what else do you think we need to change today in the next 5 to 10 years to create that runway to achieve that vision that you were talking about a few minutes ago?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Jim about alignment and breaking the barriers down. I think we've already spoken about that. IDP, we've done a few of the IDP projects. I would say they've been relatively successful. The challenge is when you introduce IDP from the contractor's point of view, you really look at it from a risk point of view, and it's very difficult to sort of assign risk categories when you do an IDP. And so to me, we're not against an IDP. We are really sort of working towards integrating the built world into a seamless platform where, again, we let the client move forward with the design, allow us to take on some design responsibilities, any degree you want us to at the end of the day. We also talk about completion guarantees, which is a big thing. That is construction completion guarantees. And my sense also in putting skin in the game. So the more that we can integrate the built world like it was way back when, I think the more advantageous we're going to be. The second thing, which is probably more important than all the above, is our category has had an out-migration of labor over the last 5 to 10 years. We've also had a tremendous amount of people retire and early, especially after COVID. People at 50 years old did not want to come back to work, understandably so. It's a very, very tough business. So to me, developing a strategy to introduce a new labor flow into the industry, and that is vocational schools, which I'm a big, big supporter of. We got rid of those back in the 90s and 2000s, and to me, it was one of the biggest mistakes America made. But to me, how do we offer first-generation students a pathway into construction? And more importantly than just first generation, women in construction. To me, I think women in construction are single-handedly probably the biggest asset on a going forward basis. And to me, you could leverage that particular category because at the end of the day, there's a category that is typically is not really been representative in our industry. We are fortunate to have 28% women in our country, in our company. And what we're expecting, we call rebuilder ratio. Over the next 10 years, we're going to be going from 28 to 38. And how we're going to be doing that is we're going back to the high schools now. In places like the Girl Scouts, we have an arrangement, an alignment with the Girl Scouts. We invest in the Girl Scouts. We bring them to our offices. We explain them some of the things we're currently doing. And we gain a sense of interest. And they all of a sudden start thinking about a sense of purpose at the end of the day, because they never thought about this particular category. So to me, I think we have to re-engineer the workforce, coupled with the idea of what I call upskill training. Okay, how do we take the younger generation and bring that into the business and teach the old generation, like reverse mentoring, not to be embarrassed that you're going to ask a stupid question of a 24-year-old, but that 24-year-old is going to give you the technological capabilities and skill sets and address your curiosities. But then again, on the other side of the coin, you're going to help them with experience. And I call that an exchange of currency at the end of the day. And if you look at things from a dollars and cents point of view, that's a pretty good bet to take.
I've been hearing this more often as far as the very deliberate pairing of people who are just coming out of school or vocational or some of the trades with those more experienced people, because exactly what you said, that relationship is so powerful, and it's an incredibly important relationship to build right now, because in 10 years, many of those people will not be working in construction anymore. Exactly. And if we don't capture that knowledge and retain it with all of the talent that we have today that is stepping into the leadership roles of tomorrow, we're going to have a big problem, because the technology layer, which I'm going to ask a couple questions about in a minute, I'm excited about that too, but the technology layer can only do so much. And we have to really empower our people and ensure that they have the perspective that's appropriate and necessary from people who have been building for 10, 20, 30, 50, hundreds of years in a way that has changed some, but also has not changed a bunch. And so there's a lot of information that they need to have in their brain.
One comment I'd like to make about that, and it's an analytic, and it's a little funny, but again, it's real. People that are over 55 years old or 60, with respect to technology, why do they have curiosity regarding technology? It is not because of their job or vocation. It's because of grandkids. That is the single purpose why people over 55 years old migrate towards technology. And so to me, that being the case, how do we make that experience much more comfortable for that very seasoned construction vet and not feel insecure about asking, again, I'll repeat myself, a 24-year-old, a question that they otherwise would not want to ask.
And I think that's a culture conversation as well.
Yeah,
it's a great point. And, when Eric, you'll remember this. When we acquired PlanGrid 4 years ago, remember he corrected me earlier, it was 4 years ago. They used to have a saying at PlanGrid, and it was to make the technology work for the fat fingers on the job site. And no disrespect there, but the fact that, these are guys, typically guys with gloves on or, big hands. And
my hands.
Yeah. And like, let's make sure everything we do works for the fat fingers. And I think they did that. And that is something, while we don't say it in those terms today, we put a lot of emphasis on how do you make sure you make it easy and you keep it intuitive, because the more capabilities you add, the easier it is to just completely get lost in the technology. But I did want to go back to something John talked about getting kids, while they're young, getting them engaged and interested in our industry. Because as to John's point, the vocational schools, which, I come from a family of six, youngest of six, very blue collar. I didn't go to vocational school. I did have family members that did, worked for the T. And it's a shame that we as a society kind of let that go. But, just as John is engaging with the Girl Scouts, which is phenomenal. Eric, about our efforts with women in construction. That continues to be incredibly important to us as a company, but also getting we have a program here in Boston, in fact, that we've partnered with Suffolk on. We call Make It Real, where we focus on inner city kids to get them engaged in construction. We did shot some videos at a couple of Suffolk sites and talked to some of the Suffolk team members. And, those are the things that That's the responsibility I think we have as technologists and as industry thought leaders and successful, business leaders in this industry. That's the responsibility we have to get more the next generation interested in this industry. So sorry I took us back to that, but it's such an important point. And if we don't fix that, we're going to be having a very different discussion in 10 years.
Jim, just one comment, Eric, not to delay this conversation or this part of the conversation. As we think about sort of our overall strategy for the United States of America, and we talk about onshoring and re-engineering our country, if you move forward the way the strategy currently exists today, it's never going to happen at the end of the day. And our category, which I'm very, very proud of, built this country on the backs of the construction trades. We're going to rebuild this country on the backs of the construction trades. What better sense of pride and ownership of being America's contractor to be able to be involved in that conversation? And so to me, I look at this as an opportunity of a lifetime. How do we embrace what's going on in Washington in the direction they're going right now to basically rebuild America? And probably the most important thing of the rebuilding to me is it's for the next generation. It's not my generation anymore. It's about the next generation. And that's really how we look at things on a going forward basis. How do we be the sort of standard bearers of the next generation, not our generation?
Yeah. And when we have the right framing and perception, I think it starts to become easier because you can have those open and honest conversations. I appreciated your point of not enough women in construction specifically. In our approach to women in construction, to me, is very refreshing because there's a bit of a performative way to talk about women in construction. We'll go, it's Women in Construction Week, and we're going to talk about it today, and then we're not going to talk about it anymore. But you need to flip that over. This is amazing people who are doing cool and amazing work who happen to be women. And if we're not tapping that portion of the workforce, we're leaving half of our potential employee base on the floor, and we just go, nope, we're not going to include them in that conversation. And that's just foolhardy because the perception and the perspectives that you get when you're inclusive in this way brings so much to the businesses that if we're not doing this well, we're going to fail. And it's also it's a real human empathetic conversation that we need to have that not everybody is unfortunately thinking about in the appropriate framing. So I appreciate both of you for, towing the line and having sometimes uncomfortable conversations because they're ones that if we don't have them, nobody's going to be having them. So I'm going to park that one because we could go down that rabbit hole for a bit. It's a heavy topic.
Jim's lead.
But
I looked at you.
No, but I appreciate you being so honest and open about it because not everybody is comfortable saying these are the challenges and this is why and this is what we need to do. And we need to have those conversations. And I'm going to have you both back and let's talk about just that and how we could be better there because I think we can have another hour-long conversation about that specifically. Yeah. But let's spin back to technology for a little bit. In the last time that we connected, John, you shared some thoughts on artificial intelligence and some other technology that you're very excited about and the impact that it's going to have on that future vision of construction that we were talking about a little bit more. So can you reiterate and tell me more about what types of tech or building methods, although I think we might have covered building methods already, are we going to have to embrace to achieve that 10-year vision that we're talking about?
What's interesting is I sort of take a step back from a holistic point of view and I look at construction as a whole. I think about back, after 2009, we had the Great Recession. We had to sort of improve our category, and we introduced technology, basically VDC, BIM, and various other types of solutions to the space. Then we moved on from there to data, and data became a big conversation in 2000, 2010, 2015. People started using data. I'm not saying ubiquitously, but I'm saying some of the contractors have made investments there, and they found it to be helpful. And as you often say, if you can't measure it, you cannot manage it. Then all of a sudden, the concept of machine learning, and you take a look at the agricultural business, how running machinery on the open farmlands, how that's improved overall efficiency at the end of the day. And now, what I think is really a huge breakthrough, I think it's the biggest issue since the introduction of the internet, artificial intelligence. Now, we've been playing around the edges of artificial intelligence, and things like metrics of safety, which we use, which is very good. Open space, which is a wonderful solution out there that we invested in. I feel very, very good about that. We have a technology investment group called Suffolk Technologies. That's one of the ones we're very, very proud of. And then also you have things like Spot the Dog that we use on some of our dogs around the country. But the sense to me to have the ability to leverage artificial intelligence, I think is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And let me sort of pare down on two specific areas first, because you got to be careful you don't boil the ocean with this particular solution. And that is on the design side. As I often say, and I'm looking over here right now, this little thing that says NASA. Okay, NASA does not design their rockets, okay, with BIM. They use artificial intelligence. Elon Musk designs his cars at Tesla using artificial intelligence. Why do we use BIM or VDC over and over again to design the same type of details when now the advent of artificial intelligence is going to cause that dynamic to change radically? Secondly, in addition to design, which I think is the most impactful area of construction, is scheduling. When we walk on our job sites today, we think we know exactly what is the most sort of thoughtful way to approach the sequencing of that particular job. What if I was to tell you that we're doing it all wrong? What if I was to tell you before up-down construction that would never happen? All of a sudden we introduce up-down construction. We've done many times around the country. We're saving, say the dirt work is going to take 12 months to get up to grade. We can get there in 6 months. Now it's an opportunity for all of us as a category to open our aperture and say to ourselves, what is possible? And I think artificial intelligence is the first time that we're able to have that conversation. And what I would say, and I'm passionate about this, we need to have this conversation as an industry, not in silos. It's too big of an issue. One, there needs to be governance around it, which I really feel strongly about. At the end of the day, be careful what you wish for. And secondly, I think the opportunities to really create value along the full sort of spectrum of construction, I mean, is absolutely incredible. And it really brings a deep breath of enthusiasm to what we do each and every day.
So I love that. I mean, John, you and we had lunch a month or so ago, and we talked about AI, and we talked about, again, across the full spectrum. But you look at design. I mean, at some point in time, the industry and those observing got this idea that, kind of every building has to be unique. And of course, we don't want, every building to be a bunch of square boxes, of course. But, there is so much data and so much to learn from. And that is what artificial intelligence feeds off of. And that's how it delivers value. I mean, honestly, in 10 years from now, maybe less, I think less, do we need to have design tools that allow design teams to draw doors, walls, and windows, or do we apply artificial intelligence to capture the requirements? What are you trying to achieve? Capture the conditions and get the design team and the construction team now integrated further along so that they're tweaking, and then from there quickly generating, again using AI and key learnings, quickly generating those construction drawings so that we're not having teams labor for weeks, for months over creating those. So there's so much out there for us to apply artificial intelligence to. It certainly starts with the data, going back to our previous conversation.
Jim, let me just give you an example. As I said, Suffolk Technologies is a group that we run that invests in contact solutions around the country. It's sort of like a Y Combinator of construction. Yeah. And there's a group out there called Firmus. And Firmus is a solution that uses artificial intelligence to do document review. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to taking 2 or 3 weeks to do a complete set of document review of a project, it'll do that in 2 days. Now, it's not 100% accurate as we sit here today, but my sense is the concept, the strategy is right. And to me, how do we sort of take the handcuffs off of traditional ways of doing things and put on the gloves of using artificial intelligence? We're partnering with a firm right now over in India having these conversations. What people don't realize here is because we're very parochial in the United States, we always do it right. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Other parts of the world right now are light years ahead of us. And I'm going to use the word in curiosity, not being afraid to ask the questions that we need to be asking to move and increase productivity in our overall category.
And it's interesting because I think part of the mentality I think that gets in the way is, is this new technology going to take jobs away? Am I going to lose my job if I apply this technology? Now, it's an interesting question in construction to ask, given our previous discussion about the job, the labor availability. But I think it's the same thing with robotics, right? People say robotics in construction, that's going to impact my job, or it's going to take away jobs from other workers. It's not. We have a shortage. What I believe is robotics on the job site can actually, robotic assist on the job site. And we have customers that are doing some amazing things in Japan with robots on the job site, assisting construction teams, getting the materials, doing the heavy lifting. Those things aren't taking away jobs. They're actually saving workers' backs. And so, we just need to get away from this mentality that AI, machine learning, robotics are going to negatively impact the job market. They won't.
I think we're close. I think we're close right now, though, thankfully.
Yeah. But I would also say this is that I sort of take a step back and I look at it from a macro point of view. If we don't, our country as a whole is going to be in trouble in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years.
Definitely.
When you think about our population of 330 million people, India just broached 1,450,000,000 end of the day. And as we all know, 70% of GDP is consumption. And if we can't grow our population, then we can't increase our productivity, And the only way to do this, if we can grow our population only at a very, very modest rate, is increase our productivity through technology and innovation. And so to me, if we're going to take our GDP from 25 trillion up to 27, 28, 29, 30, and be the number one economy in the world, we have no choice but to innovate, and we can't be insecure about taking away jobs at the end of the day. So this is a much bigger conversation. And again, it comes back to, Eric, to your point, how do we sit around the table and have this conversation? And it's not about Suffolk, it's not about Autodesk. It's about us thinking about our country, our economy, our future state of America, and being part of the solution. We may not get it right, but at least we have that conversation about trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. And all these different technologies we're talking about, it's an augmentation conversation today. And I feel more people are starting to see that. When Spot started showing up on project sites, people got a bit freaked out, or they go, oh, we're going to 3D print buildings, skeptics here on if that's going to be feasible or not. But everything we look back in now, we say, okay, we have this massive gap in labor availability right now. We have a lot of advanced technology that is starting to become more and more ubiquitous in the construction industry at large. And when we can merge those two situations, suddenly we're empowered to take away the dangerous jobs that people have. We have an opportunity to make sure that people go home at 5 instead of 9 p.m. and also start to fill some of those gaps that we haven't had the opportunity to. So it's not a takeaway. The job might change. Now you're doing something a bit differently and you're augmenting it, or instead of doing material takeoffs for 2.5 weeks, you do it for an hour and a half at the end of the project when you say, okay, here's all of the things that I looked at. Now let's make sure it's right, versus by hand for 19 years. And so part of that is perception conversation, I think, as far as we start informing and educating people back to the partnership relationship you were talking about earlier, where you have our younger generation who is a bit more savvy for the capabilities and comfortable using it, and bringing that conversation to some of the more traditional tradespeople and saying, hey, look, you shouldn't be afraid of this. Let me show you how this helps you do your job. And also, you might not hurt yourself when you're doing your job, because this thing is going to take away that portion. You get to retire comfortably instead of being, a little bit more injured or a little bit more tired at the end of, your very impressive career. So, John, I know we were talking about this here, and I think what we were just talking about leads into it. But when we did last speak and what we were talking about earlier, we do need to pivot from our very heavily white-collar driven recruiting and sourcing for labor in today's market. And that focus is going to pivot and trend to recruiting more traditional blue-collar roles, as you were alluding to before. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you feel that is?
I think the industry got away from the pure bricks and mortar, so to say, of what it really stands for. I think we tried to white-collarize, a category that really is proudly a blue-collar category. And to me, it's all of a sudden we're finding out we've got these experienced superintendents on our job sites retiring, and we're fundamentally not able to backfill those particular individuals. And we've almost had an awakening as a category, as an industry. And so to me, reopening these vocational schools, which is fundamentally important. We're doing that in the northeast part of the country now, which I'm very, very proud of. And also, I think the idea of providing training to these first-generation students. Now, we used to recruit our young class of kids coming in, 75 to 100 kids every single year, young men and women, and we would go to liberal arts schools because I always thought about the idea of critical thinking. I thought that was good. Have an open mind of how to do things differently. What we're finding out is that the critical thinkers don't want to stay in our category, okay? And the ones that do very, very well, but the ones that don't move on to the financial services or other type of categories. So to me, going after these kids in VOTech, especially first gen, that see construction as an opportunity to live the American dream. And I often say, I don't hear people talking about that often, okay? But you talk to some of these first gen men and women that have come here, that living in an environment that they truly want to live that American dream and feel proud of what they're doing and want to be in the construction business. Those are the people that we're looking for right now. Now, Eric, what I would say to you is Suffolk, we're not the right company for everybody to work for. We have very, very core values. We discovered them. It took us 24 years to discover them. We didn't define them, okay? And we really, really care deeply about our people, okay? Deeply about our people. And we want people to feel part of the family. But at the end of the day, we have to work hard. We have to show up every single day. We have to produce. We have to demonstrate to our clients that when we make a commitment to them, that they can go to bed at night knowing that we're going to deliver.
And that's the kind of organization that retains their talent too. You mentioned the increase in self-perform that you're starting to see across the country. And I think that's going to continue to be more common. There's I think a risk mitigation that comes with that for the business because they control more of the trades and the labor pool that's coming in. But I've seen both sides of this where I've worked at companies where they had more self-performed talent. They retained them when the projects were ending, and they might not have had new ones to fill, but they were going to be there because they trusted them, and then they went back to that next project. I've seen the other side where the project ends and there are 2 weeks and you go, we don't have to do the project. I'm sorry, we're going to lay you off. And I know that there's a balance there and there's a lot that goes with it. But in this kind of economy, in this kind of labor situation, especially when you're drawing people that are younger than myself, if you don't have an organization where people are going to be confident that you're there for them, they're going to go work somewhere else.
And Eric, what I'd say to that is I think that's the benefit of scale. I think people that have been in our business for a period of time understand it's a revenue game at the end of the day because of low margins. And I'm just being very candid when I say that. And, we as a company, we do $5.5 to $6 billion a year, and we have about 100 jobs going on throughout the country. And so having that core labor force that you talk about, because we can't self-perform every single job, but the idea is to put our best foot forward to try to be competitive and control the different aspects of the project gives much more predictability at the end of the day. But I do think, to your point, you're going to see the industry moving much more back in favor of self-perform at the end of the day and increase quality, increase consistency and predictability. And at the end of the day, probably most importantly, lower cost.
So Jim, looking back to the tail end of this conversation we're having right here, what advice would you offer other leaders that are out there listening to help them recruit more blue-collar talent, but more importantly, successfully train them to embrace these technologies, especially if they're unfamiliar once they've been hired?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Our customers around the globe are investing in the technology, but it can't stop there. You have to invest in the employees to make sure that they have the skills, the technology skills, to apply that technology to the job site. And, by the way, they should also be leaning on their technology providers because I believe we have an onus, we have a responsibility to make sure our customers, it doesn't stop when they buy the tool, buy the technology. That's just the beginning. It's making sure that we're there helping their teams on the job site embrace the tools and technologies. But I think there's the training part, but I also think there's I think firms like Suffolk, right? They're able to attract great talent because they paint the picture of what the future can be. And I think that's so important that we're all painting a picture, an exciting picture of what the future can be, because that will motivate kids coming out of school to want to learn construction, to want to embrace the technology. So, I think it can't stop at the technology investment. It has to go well beyond that.
Yeah, we have to set everybody up to be successful, and I think you're absolutely right. The onus isn't simply on the contractor that is doing the hiring,
No.
and it's not only on the technology provider. There's a relationship that's built there, but you have to make sure that when people are coming in, you're finding ways to train them that's equitable and fair and helps them understand the tools, especially if they're coming from a background that isn't traditionally tech savvy. So there's a lot to consider. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that topic
It's
as
an
well.
interesting topic. It's very, very near and dear to me, Eric. And I say this, with full disclosure and transparency. I'm a severe dyslexic. And I didn't learn to read until I entered ninth grade. I can't spell today past third grade, and you can never read my handwriting. And from a practical point of view, I should have been a laborer. Somebody helped me learn to read, to write, to gain a sense of confidence in myself. I was always a very good athlete. And what I learned through that, and as I entered in the construction space, is that when you think about construction, there's a shortage of training overall in our category. And again, it's siloed. And how do we recognize the fact that every dollar spent in training in construction, you get a tenfold return? The average of training dollars in another category like financial services, it's a 2x return. Because people in our industry, a lot of them do have learning differences, to be candid with you. And by providing that training, all of a sudden, the ROI is substantial. There's no better ROI in training than in our construction category. Furthermore, what we've done is we strategically plan, as Jim pointed out. Coming in, as we start now ramping up to 24, okay, we've come up with this program called T24, Training 24. And what it is to take a holistic review of our entire training program. And how do we focus on what we call upskilling our people? Okay, not providing them with skills. Let's take an assessment of where they are at this particular point in time in their career, agnostic of what their age is, but just understand what their capabilities are and where they're short. Because I believe everybody wants to do the right thing. Sometimes they're just unwilling to ask for the training. And so if we can put together a program of upskilling in our organization across the entire platform, both the functional side and the operational side, and then measure that with a sense of clarity and watch the needle move on our training, you're going to see a corresponding improvement in NOI in the organization. There is no doubt in my mind about that. And ultimately, our goal is, as a company, and again, I say this and I use this word before with humility, we want to be the best, have the best training program in the country as a contractor. And so to me, I think I have a responsibility, being a severe dyslexic with a learning difference, okay, that wants to take a leadership role and explain to people, it's okay to ask that stupid question, because you know what? You're going to get a thoughtful response and you're going to get a pat in the back.
I appreciate your candor here, because the position that you're in I'm thankful for it, because people out there who do have differences need that role model to say, I see myself in this role. And it's harder to qualify that to somebody if they don't see somebody who is like them in doing something that they aspire to do. And so your forthcomingness with that perspective, I think, has a tremendous value for people out there listening, where if you put in the work and you find the right path and organizations are equitable in how they bring people into their team, I think the opportunities are there. But it also, as you alluded to, it steps further. The training conversation that we're having now, I feel like we're getting much better as an industry. And I know we're doing some stuff within ACS these days, which I'm appreciative of, with Just Pollock's team, who I had on the podcast a few months ago. But if we're not thinking through all of those different learning approaches, we're doing our teams a disservice, because not everybody learns in a 2-hour sit-down training session that they never get to go back to and see again. Some people want a 2-minute session just to learn about the one thing that they can't remember how to do today, something they might not do every 6 months, every 10 months, every 12 months. And if we're not giving them the opportunity to hone in there, and we're not setting up our systems to empower that, we're setting ourselves up for failure, unfortunately. And so when we do segment our training to be more equitable and meet all these different opportunities and different ways of perspectives and learning and everything else, I think, one, it allows people to go back and find that information much more easily than they would have, but also it allows people who might not have been successful in the ranks of your organization to step forward, because they can find the information that they need.
And Eric, I just want to echo, John, your transparency is, both inspiring and motivational to folks like Eric said that may say, can I do that? And I think it's thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much. Again, as I said before, I'm really honored to be here and having this conversation. I feel very, very lucky.
the feeling is very mutual, John. So I've got one more question for both of you. Jim, I've asked this question of you a few times, so I'm going to kick it your direction first. And it's one that I ask every guest, and it's one of my favorites because the answers really range such a fun spectrum of like a physical tool or something a bit broader. So Jim, what is one tool that you will bring to every project that you work on, regardless of what you're working on?
You did ask me this before. Let's see if I give the same answer. It should be the same answer. I think the tool that I try to bring to any project is collaboration. Collaboration and partnership. It's a two-pronged tool. I just think, what we do is a team sport, and you can't go it alone. And so it takes collaboration. It takes great partnership. And that's the one tool in my toolbox.
You're right. I think we're in a unique industry. Like what other industry would you see 15, 20, 30, 40 different companies all converging on one small space to all collaborate seamlessly together on a schedule that they're probably not very excited about? It's a very unique environment, and collaboration is key. Jim, I have it in front of me. You did say collaboration the last time, so you're consistent, and I appreciate that. So John, how about you? What's one tool you'd bring to every project?
Very interesting question. And we talk a lot about where the industry is going, and I focus on the job site because I think the money is made on the job site in the field. And I talk about the telephone, I talk about the iPhone, I talk about a tablet. And to me, what I bring to the job site is my iPhone at the end of the day. Because I think in 2 or 3 years from now, this is how we're going to run a job site. And this telephone right here, this iPhone, is the job site of the future. People keep asking me that. We have a thing in our office called Mission Control. It's a data center where all incoming data on each particular job, we come in and we measure through our dashboards. And it's dynamic, it's not static. Then right next to it, we have what is called the job site of the future sort of catalog. And it's the different solutions we're using on a job site so people can start visualizing, again, being a dyslexic, what things potentially look like. At the end of the day, I don't think we're going to be holding job site meetings in trailers. I really don't. I don't think we're going to be sitting there with, calendars on the wall, and I don't think we're going to be having donuts in the room. I think a lot of it's going to be virtual at the end of the day. I think a lot of it's held inside the structure itself at the end of the day. But I think that you'll have what is called a trade partner platform that everybody is leveraging different types of apps for different types of solutions on the job site. And I think that's going to create a tremendous amount of efficiency and productivity overall. So when I take a look at the iPhone, I see this as our job site of the future.
And honestly, I think that tool that you're talking about right now is the reason why I'm sitting in front of you right now, because PlanGrid would not have existed in the state it did if the iPad hadn't made the advances that it did to even bring the original idea for that tool of let's digitize our blueprints and make it easy for our field to use. And then it just kind of grew from there. And so it's exciting because the accessibility to information and the ability to communicate really does come from these tools. It introduces its own challenges, I think, because when you get into more rural communities or if you're working in confined spaces or underground, the accessibility to that data starts to become a little bit more challenging. But if we're thinking about it and embracing technology like Starlink and all these other new tools that are starting to come together, we get to solve that problem. And I know our technology is considering all of these in the back end.
Absolutely.
So appreciative of that perspective. But it's a big one. And I think it's just going to continue to escalate as we make these tools more powerful and bring more of that data into a usable fashion into the iPhone, the iPad, or whatever you happen to be using that particular day. So, gentlemen, as I said, that's my last question for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate all of your time. I know it's a tall order to get an hour of your time to sit down and have these big conversations, but I sincerely, appreciate all of the knowledge and information you've shared with me today.
Well, Eric, I would just say, on behalf of myself and also I'd say in the industry, thank you for your great work that you're doing. This is the type of environment that we need to bring people together, to have conversations that, again, can strengthen our overall industry and help all of us. And Jim, thank you for the work at Autodesk. I mean, as we all know, Autodesk is a leading technology solution company in the world. From our perspective, we've had great relationships. We look forward to continuing that relationship. And I would say anything we can do for the industry, that's what we're here for at the end of the day. So thank you.
And John, thank you.
All right. Well, Everybody out there listening, this is another episode of Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. Of course, I am your host. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter at builder_digital. If you're listening on your favorite podcast player, you absolutely got to get over to YouTube because we are in the Technology Center here in Boston, and you got to check out the space that we're working in today. It's a really cool one. Otherwise, if you're an old school listener, thank you so much. And without further ado, goodbye.